I'm on Fitz. How are you? Welcome back to the Fit Stop podcast. It was the Miami Grand Prix of 2024, and it was a win for Lando Norris in the sprint race, a crazy sprint race, and then Oscar Piastri with his third win in a row and another lead in the Drivers' Championship of Formula 1 2025. And hey, Miami has signed on again an extended deal to like 2045. Jesus, I don't even know if I'll be live then. Welcome to the Fit Stop podcast with BYD Limerick and Lions Motor Group. Let's get into a crazy weekend in Miami. It's the Fit Stop podcast. We're back taking a look at Miami Grand Prix this weekend. And yes, I am wearing my Ferrari top. I kind of put it on today and said I would support the Tifosi, support Charles and Lewis after a real difficult weekend. And let's just get into that while I have my Ferrari kit on. And it was an awful weekend. The sprint race brought a downpour at the formation lap, which led to a red flag. But Charles made contact with the wall and damage to his car, so he could not take part in the sprint race. So that meant that he was out, that he couldn't regain his position in the race. Lewis Hamilton, third. Good strategy call from Lewis during the sprint race, showed a lot of experience. But just like in China, from a good sprint race to a horrendous weekend, and to be fighting with the Visa Cash App Red Bulls, who had a lovely pink livery this weekend. Lewis Hamilton struggling, Charles struggling, inter-teammate battles as well. Lewis on the phone, and I'd say on the talkback radio to his team. And a lot of the things that he said we're not used to hearing from Lewis Hamilton, but that is frustration and that is wanting to win. And of course, he did drop the lines afterwards in the media pen of, we're all in a team here. It's just to motivate the team. You kind of wonder where it's going with Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari. And I said in last week's podcast, they're struggling, he's struggling, and he hasn't seemed to be able to adapt himself to the new regulations since 2022, but hasn't really adapted to the Ferrari. And if he had any doubt about Mercedes, he's made the wrong move. Now, look, the whole Ferrari move is different because you don't know what kind of Ferrari team we're going to have when the new regulations come in. Money-wise, PR-wise, it all makes sense for Lewis Hamilton to be a part of Ferrari because money-wise for both of them and commercially, he'll be so well off, even if he's not now, he'll be so more well off when he's finished his career with Ferrari. But I think this season might be a write-off for Lewis Hamilton unless he gets a bit of luck. I think he's going to struggle with the car unless they get the upgrades in, which are due. So remember, Ferrari are due upgrades to the car. Maybe they could turn things around at the home Grand Prix, the next Formula 1 race in Imola. Fingers crossed, we'll see. But really struggling this weekend was Lewis Hamilton and his teammate as well. Where did they finish in the race? 7th and 8th. They were battling each other. They were battling Williams. They've been beaten by a Williams car in a Ferrari by Alex Albon. So not a good weekend for Ferrari. Great weekend for McLaren. Piastri was unlucky with the safety car. It just didn't go his way. It went Lando Norris' way in the sprint to get that win. But when it came to the Grand Prix, he beat his teammate by 4 seconds. Could have been a Grand Prix that Lando Norris could win. Yeah, potentially. But that incident with Max Verstappen at the start, 4 seconds behind his teammate. But then you got to look at George Russell in third. Another great performance from George to get himself on the podium. Not a win for Mercedes, but they're still on a weekend where they can. George is on the podium, generally finishing in third place. He was 37 seconds off. I think Martin Brundle said and Ted Kravitz said that, McLaren could just make a pit stop for the crack to make it interesting. Or if they were like, we'll mind the tyres and we'll change them, they so could have done that. That's the dominance I said that we haven't seen in the last few Grand Prix. It's been close. But in the Miami Grand Prix, McLaren showed how far ahead they are from everyone. And there'll be certain tracks. And this kind of goes back to the Lewis Hamilton times, to the Max Verstappen recent years of beating people by 30, 40, 50 seconds, having a pit stop advantage as well. So had the rain come or had something different happened, they still had that in the bag. Piastri and Norris had it covered with George Russell in third. Verstappen in fourth. Congratulations to Verstappen and his Mrs. Kelly Piquet and having their baby daughter. Could we see the first female driver in Formula 1 being a Verstappen? No, that would be an absolute story, because Max's mother is an absolute legend and so fast of a racing driver. His father is quite fast as well, and we know what Max is capable of. And Max being Max got pole position where no one again this weekend would have thought Max Verstappen would have been on pole, but it came to the first lap again, and it came to Max Verstappen locking up, and Max pretty much pushing Lando Norris off. Now, Lando's not saying much about it, and he's kind of saying, well, what's the point? We know the rules, it'll be discussed, and it's just another, how do you approach racing Max Verstappen? And it seems that the general consensus from McLaren was to Piastri and Norris and kind of going, look, get through the first lap, we have the car, we can race Max and we can do something. Was Lando being a bit too much of a racing driver? But then again, he wouldn't be a racing driver if he didn't go for it. And if he wants to win a championship and he wants to be Piastri, if he had backed off maybe, it mightn't have worked out. So, like, you know, who knows what could have happened. It's easy to say, yeah, he should have backed out, but in the heat of the battle and when you're going 150, 200 miles an hour into a corner, it's easier said than done. Max is Max and he'll race you hard. And he gave Lando a little bit of a push. Lando will say, if there was a wall there, I was in it. So Max will just keep racing hard. And I don't think they're complaining about Max, but that's the way Max races. So first corner with Max the last few Grand Prix has proven very hard, and now they can kind of see why Lewis Hamilton had such a hard championship in 2021. But Verstappen pretty much kind of ruined his own race really, and fourth was the best he could do. Good battles with Lando Norris when Lando was making his way back through the field, and Max kind of said afterwards he was just doing it for a bit of fun. He was hard racing a bit more because there wasn't much they could do. At least he could have a bit of fun and maybe try and hold Lando back as much as he could. But, you know, 39 seconds off the pace to get pole position. Max and Red Bull just aren't in the place really to be winning the Grand Prix, but they're definitely in the place to get a good qualifying lap. And how fast that Max Verstappen is, he'll be looking to try and maybe get a win as we head to Imola in the next Grand Prix. Williams in fifth, Albon. Now, they'll be disappointed with the sprint race and the penalty, but you have to say, and I said this in the last podcast, Williams, excuse the pun, are absolutely flying it. Williams are on a high, bagging points in fifth place. Like, that's fifth for a Williams. It is absolutely unbelievable. 48 seconds off the pace, yes. But wow, to be keeping up with the pace, to be beating the Ferraris. Albon is having a great weekend with a car that they're still using parts from last year, some of the tubs from last year. And I think just with James Vowles in there, he's a great team principal. He's a great technical head. He understands everything. You know, I would be excited to be in that team for 26, 27 and further on. Great performance from Williams. And we said at the start of the season, Williams will do better. They look strong from the start of the season. Maybe a bit of bad luck in the few Grand Prix, but we said they're thereabouts in the midfield. They're just above it, really, kind of, aren't they? I would suspect an all-podium for Williams. What could Williams do in Monaco? Could Monaco be a Grand Prix that could suit Williams? We'll find out in a few weeks' time. Charles Antonelli in sixth place. Antonelli was on flying form this weekend when it came to qualifying. He got a nudge. Well, not a nudge, a gentle push and a gentle, hey, welcome to the club from a fellow kind of rookie, but not so much of a rookie, Oscar Piastri in the sprint race. And then it didn't go his way either as well, did it for Antonelli in the race, but managed to get sixth in the end. I think it's just a learning curve, but he's shown the potential he has and how fast he could be with the pole position and with his starting grid as well for the Grand Prix on Sunday. Antonelli showing the speed is there, but he's really racing the wheels off that car. And kind of saw that in the test when he crashed in Monza that time. He just needs to learn, you know, kind of how to lean on the car and how to lean on the tyres. It's just a learning curve, learning development for him, but he's showing that, you know, he can race at the front. And I think the more experience he gets, look, he's only a child. He really is. The more experience he gets, he'll do a lot better. But he'll be happy to get points and happy to get a pole position this weekend and just show that, yeah, look, the pace is there. 7th for Charles. Lewis Hamilton in 8th, Carlos Sainz in 9th. Carlos Sainz not happy at all. Not happy. Listen back to the team radio. He wasn't happy with how it played out with his teammate. But look, points in the bag. It was one of those team radios at the end where it was like, hey, stop talking. Stop saying stuff. We'll talk about this in public. But yeah, not the happiest of Carlos Sainz at Williams so far. I know he's been bagging points, but he's not where he needs to be, and he's probably not feeling the love as much. For him in 9th place. Tsunoda gets a point for Red Bull. Struggling all weekend, Tsunoda. It's that second car. it's the same curse. It still continues. So know that, even though I did a bit of a test a few weeks ago between Grand Prix in Silverstone, didn't get much of a running maybe that day, is still struggling. Hadjar in 11th, did show some good pace over the weekend, but didn't manage to get points on Sunday. Ocon in 12th in the Haas. Gasly in 13th also for Alpine. 14th for Hulkenberg. No points, but they'll be happy to be higher up the grid in 14th. Alonso and Stroll 15th and 16th. Liam Lawson booting Fernando Alonso out of the sprint race, and Lance Stroll struggling all weekend. The rest then did not finish. Liam Lawson, another bad weekend, just a bad season. I think his motivation is totally lost in Lawson. Bartoletto in Kick Sauber, and then it was a retirement for Barron and Jack Doohan as well at the start. And it seems that Colapinto could be swapped for Imola, that Jack Doohan could be out. Are we surprised? No, we thought this would happen. There was a program on some foreign TV channel, not sure what it was, and they asked some guy, when would Colapinto be coming in to Formula 1? He said soon. And when the cameras went off and the sound was still on, he said the word Imola. And I've seen that on another podcast, and I think that's come true. He's been struggling so far this season. Had a bit of a big crash, didn't he, in Japan, which will be costly to Alpine, and he just hasn't been on the pace compared to his teammates. So it looks like Jack Doohan could be in for a swap already. We're swapping a second driver. Liam Lawson making way for Tsunoda, and it looks like Colapinto could be in the Alpine. Is it a good move by Alpine? Probably. Colapinto, I suppose, would have been in a Williams if it wasn't for Carlos Sainz being booted out of Ferrari. But it's Oscar Piastri who leads the championship. Lando Norris struggling with his head, really, isn't he? He looks disappointed as usual. He always does this really sad interview thing where he shows that he's upset, but then again he wears his heart in his sleeve. But do McLaren now, I know the championship isn't miles away from each other, but do they start looking at Piastri and go, we gotta wrap up this Constructors' Championship, which let's say 90% it's going to be theirs. Drivers' Championship, very likely that it's going to be theirs. Do they really want to have their drivers banging wheels? Because that's what it might come to. Piastri will have more race wins now than Lando Norris does. Is he one to fight for the championship? Do McLarens put all their eggs in his basket? Does that upset Lando Norris, and then Lando Norris leaves the team? And then our Irish driver goes in. Max. There we go. Let's get him into the car. Alex Dunn, sorry, not Max. Alex Dunn. Let's get Alex into the car. But that's the way it could be going. And I did say at the start of the season, the start of the podcast, Oscar Piastri is a favourite for the championship this year. And I think the late Eddie Jordan would have agreed with that one as well. It's a strong performance this weekend. Orange is in Florida, and orange was the colour. It was a 1-2 this weekend for McLaren. It's Piastri that leads the championship. Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari struggling, and a great weekend for Williams, and maybe a swap in Alpine as well. I'm One Face. Thank you for listening to Fitz That Podcast with BYD Limerick and Lions Motor Group. Leave a comment underneath if you want to have a chat of everything Formula 1, and we'll see you after the Imola Grand Prix.